where we plan to take on the world with all that's strength, with all that's life. We learn to love, we learn to cry, we learn if you run and you give up, did they hold you down long enough until you knew what you were made of? Did you dance in the middle of the floor on a Saturday night? Did you try to take on the world? Did you leave me behind? I wait on the same sidewalk that we grew up, 'cause I know you always walk the same way back, where you learn to live, you learn to love, you learn to cry, you learn if you run and you give up, then they hold you down long enough until you knew.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying WIF and the fabulous programming that the WIF committee put together for everyone this year. It's a little bit different this year, not having it live at AOK. It was wonderful having live audiences for all the incredible films. But it's also, really wonderful that Adam and his team put together this virtual festival for us that we can still, coordinate and collaborate. We've had some really great Q&A opportunities and some fabulous films. And also, nice thing too is because you can sort of watch it over time, so you have the opportunity to watch all 30 films in one day, or you can sort of spread them out. My name is Phyllis Ellis, and I have been working with the Wingish Film Institute for about 20 years with Dr. Shirley Chichu and WIF, and I've also in my professional life worked as a filmmaker. And for probably the last, so what is it, 2020, maybe 15 years, I've been working predominantly in documentaries. And it was sort of a natural evolution. And I found that experiencing real stories with real people, and trying to be part of a conversation, whether it's social or political, or it's just a beautiful art film. There was something about doing and experiencing real people's lives that really appealed to me. And also the relationship between, with the team, because the team in documentary filmmaking is much smaller than being on a very large film set. So you have this really intimate relationship with the cinematographer, intimate relationship with the person doing sound, intimate relationship with the editor, and the composer, and sound designer, and animator. It's sort of a one-on-one, but it's definitely an extremely collaborative experience. Documentaries, as are start with something real. Either it's something that's happened personally to you, or you're connected to a story because of your lived experience, or you happen upon a story, or someone brings you an idea and you try to formulate what that concept would be. So, it really starts with a concept. So I always say documentary films are written 3 times. Well, kind of 4 times in your head, and then you write the concept, and then it gets written, and then it gets written again while you're shooting, and then it gets written again while you're cutting. So it's it's a sort of a three script process. I do find with documentary. The interesting thing with concept too. Um, Sometimes I was speaking earlier, and with Sam Vinyl about his film, and he found the story. He was following the story in the news. Um, I've spoken to many filmmakers that, it's a personal story that's sort of generated out of their own lived experience, or sort of a family occurrence or crisis. The most recent film that I did, called Toxic Beauty, came to me. It was originally a concept for a television series, and it wasn't getting greenlit. And so the executive producing company approached me and said, "Do you think maybe there's a documentary film here?" And at first, when I looked at it, I didn't think there was. And then I started to research, and I realized that I had actually a personal connection to the story. So I was an Olympic athlete, and I competed a long time ago. I was 12. No, I wasn't 12. I competed in 1984, and we used talc, baby powder, like heroin. We just used it all the time. And because the film was about toxicants and chemicals and carcinogens in personal care and cosmetics. And I didn't wear a lot of makeup, and I thought, oh, whatever. Anyway, all of a sudden, I am connected to this doctor in Boston, Dr. Daniel Kramer, and he's the leading expert on the connection between talc, the use of baby powder, and ovarian cancer. And while I was speaking with him on the phone, he said, you're really high risk. If you used it for 10 years with the number of usage, you're actually high risk, and you should get your tissue tested. And so then all of a sudden, the film took on a very personal, it became very personal to me. Then I myself was affected. So that happened in the concept phase. And after you sort of have that sort of initial concept, then you start to figure out how you can develop that concept into a 1 page or a 2 page if you're looking to get financed. But how do you take that concept and actually develop that concept into a thesis with not only just themes, but also who are the characters that you're going to attach to your film? So for me, with Toxic Beauty, I started with one, Dr. Daniel Kramer. And then what happens is then Daniel Kramer introduces me to someone else, and then to another doctor. And then all of a sudden, I have this sort of narrative going that I can then build and start to develop the concept. In Canada, one of the advantages of working within the Canadian system is that a lot of the networks, most of the networks, provide what's called development money. And that can run between, 10, 15, 20, $25,000. It's not a lot of money, but it is some money. And with that money, you can develop your concept. So you can develop the Bible or the sort of thesis or the script in order to create the film. Let's say you're making a 90-minute film. And sometimes you have enough money in that budget that they create, that you create, and that they give you the money to support you, is then you can shoot a proof of concept. Once you have the proof of concept, then you take that back to the broadcaster, and then there's a possibility for the broadcaster to offer you a green light. I wasn't going to move into funding in this moment, but now that I'm talking about it, so what happens is you develop the film, you get development money from the broadcaster, and then you develop it, and then they give you a green light. And depending on the broadcaster, a broadcast license can run between 80 and 150,000. And let's say you need 500,000 to make your movie. What that broadcast license does for you is it triggers your ability to access other funds. And often there's the CMF fund that sort of goes with the broadcaster. And then there's the POV fund and Ontario Creates. And there are all these other areas that you can, and grants. The Rogers Fund that has an equity fund and also a grant. As I said, point of POV fund. And you can really accumulate 80 or 90% of your budget once you get the trigger from the broadcaster. So that broadcast license becomes gold. And even though they don't actually give you the cash, they give you a piece of paper. You can take that piece of paper and often, you have an executive producer that's attached. You take that piece of paper and you bank that broadcast license. Now it sounds easy, and there used to be many, many, many opportunities to get documentary films financed. There are less networks now, and maybe less opportunity. Maybe things are opening up a little bit with COVID, but that's basically how it works. Your best unless you're going to self finance, which is I've done that before too, which is very, very difficult and hard on everyone. Is you have a concept, one page, you pitch to a broadcaster, and at each network there's a team. Like at CBC, for example, there's different strands. There's POV, there's the documentary channel, there's Passionate Eye. There's different places that you can take your concept and pitch to get development money. CTV, Rogers, APTN, and TVO. TVO is a fantastic place. They do a ton of documentaries. So does the documentary channel at CBC. So you take your concept, you pitch it in, they give you development money, and you, with that development money, you create your package, your Bible, which usually is inclusive of a couple log line, your title, your log line, a long synopsis, sometimes a sort of a breakout of a script, and your characters. Which characters are important to tell your story, and the team. So yourself as a filmmaker, writer, director, your cinematographer, potentially your editor, executive producer, that's a possibility. There's also grant opportunities as well. And certainly in working with Dr. Shirley Chichu and a remarkable woman named Sophie Edwards that she's working with right now, there's an incredible access for Indigenous now, especially, and opening up for Indigenous content and Indigenous filmmakers. So there's a breadth of new granting opportunities and arts focused grants that are more than needed and happening right now. So it's a very good time to look to access those possibilities. But no film, like whether you're talking about a narrative film or you're talking about a documentary, the most important thing are the characters and the story. So everybody says, what's the story? What's the narrative? People say, what's the narrative? And then what's the visual language? So the narrative usually comes, and what I like to do is I spend a lot of time with the characters. And I'll use Toxic Beauty as an example. So I knew that I'd met Dr. Dan Kramer. He told me I was at risk, and then he introduced me to the lawyers and these women that were part of this class action suit. Some of them at the end of their lives. And if you want, a great privilege as a filmmaker, one of the great privileges is spending time with people, at the end of their life, and for them to invite you into their world at the end because they feel they want to share their story so that it doesn't happen to anyone else. and they want their life to be validated. So I had this great opportunity, and all of us did, of spending time with women at the end of their lives. So you have to decide at the beginning, do I want to do pre-interviews? So there's a pre-interview process that, you phone someone, you go and meet with them without cameras, because trust is the most important thing when you're making a documentary film. To establish an open and honest relationship with your characters, with the people in your film, with the real lives of the real people that you're going to be exploring and their stories. But to establish a level of trust. It was interesting when I was speaking with Sam earlier, for a long time, many years ago, you didn't want to show the characters or the people in your film a cut because you were afraid that they might not like it, or but now we're becoming far more collaborative. And one of the things I do at the very beginning of the process when I'm working with people is I always say, um, I will share your transcripts with you and allow, and provide you an opportunity to look at either the footage, the complete footage, or the cut, so that they can contribute and they can say, I don't want to say that about my grandmother. I thought I did, but I don't. And then 2 weeks later, they'll call you back and say, actually, it's okay that I say that about my grandmother. So, characters. Couple things that we do in documentary film. There's lots of different approaches. We've all seen the talking head documentary where we're following something that somebody is saying, and it gets supported by archival imagery or photographs, because not everything's happening in the moment. A lot of things and a lot of given circumstances and lived experiences have happened before. So we have our characters, the people in our films, talking like this, however you want to frame them, and they tell their story. I often do that, even if I'm not going to use it, because I find when people tell their stories, um, you think the story is about one thing, and it ends up being about something completely different. If you establish a relationship and a trust and truth with the people that you're working with so intimately as a documentary filmmaker, often the story becomes about something else. For example, so I had an opportunity to go and meet this woman. Her name was Linka, and she was dying of ovarian cancer. And she actually passed away 6 or 7 days after I had the privilege of spending time with her, or Iris Ing and I did. And I thought that it was going to be about, because I'd spoken with her on the phone and she was very weak. And I thought that we were going to shoot a woman dying of ovarian cancer linked to her use of baby powder. And when I got there, she had her life sort of spread out in photographs. And she began to talk about her experience as in the military and as sort of a frontline worker, and first on the ground in Afghanistan, in Kuwait, and in war-torn countries. She had been almost kidnapped. The truck that she just stepped out of blew up. She had been in the most extreme situations, and had served her country, proudly served her country for many years. And she was fearless. And she had a huge life and had done so much. And her story became about that. It became about this extraordinary woman who had contributed so much and had risked her life for her country and was being killed by powder that was created by a massive company that were warned 30 years prior that that powder was carcinogenic. So then all of a sudden, it's not just about cosmetics and carcinogens and chemicals that are in toxic products. It becomes about a human being that has a massive life taken down by greed, taken down by big pharma, taken down by corporate, a really sort of condemned corporate culture, and a corporate culture that knew. So that's how things change with documentaries when you have the opportunity to take the time of getting you thinking the story is about one thing, and then it takes sometimes a hard left or a hard right in another direction. You have your talking head or you have your narrative stories that you're gathering, and then you have the verite or what's happening in real time. And that's always hard because often by the time you sort of find your documentary story, it's already happened. And you're trying to figure out what can you shoot in real time to make the story current. So I'll go back to toxic beauty again. How am I going to tell this story without some of the women have passed away? There's more to the story than just baby powder. It is in every single product that we use. And then we find out that Johnson and Johnson has directly marketed this carcinogenic powder to African American and Latinas women, Hispanic women, and they have been distributing it all over the world into third world countries, and also shipping it predominantly to indigenous communities. So then that thickens the plot. All of a sudden, it's not just pouring powder into your hand. Now it is a very serious um, condemnation of, as I said, the power of big pharma, but the conspiracy of what's potentially happening within this story. But then you expand past that and you start to get into what's happening in this moment. How are we going to find that story? Well, if you keep following, I always say that I never know what's going to happen with a film until it starts talking back to me. And what I mean by that is you have all of these ideas and maybe you put them on a board and maybe you have them cards all over your table, or everything's written in a book, or somebody tells you a story. And it's going in your ears, but as soon as the film starts to then talk back to you and you start to listen, then you start to find the moments in time that are actually happening and you don't even realize they're right in front of you. So by example, I had an opportunity to go and talk to this woman. Her name was Shruti Malangayan. She's this really cool doctor in Boston, young, really brilliant. And she was doing this study around the world about ovulation and menstruation. And she said, well, why don't you just come and listen to, I've got some, medical students that are doing this session. And I thought, you know what? I don't really want to shoot a bunch of medical students. I really want to talk to her in the lab, but I don't really want to do the medical student thing. And she said, well, why don't you come in and. So I said, fine. And I went in and we were shooting. And there was this young medical student named Mimi Nguyen. And as she started talking, she started to realize that she was actually using 27 carcinogenic products that are, so many young people are using. And I was actually going that day to have a session at this place called Silent Spring that tested people's chemical body burden. And she turned to me and she said, "Can I go?" And as we followed Mimi into that situation, we followed Mimi into her life. This young, diverse woman who had a whole story. She had a breast tumor. She didn't know how she got it. She talked about her family's history, the pressure of being colonized, and the perception of beauty from, the Eurocentric perception of beauty. And then all of a sudden, the film wasn't about me and about talc and about that I was at risk. All of a sudden, the narrative and one of the major themes of the film was we have to change these beauty norms so women don't have to choose between their health and trying to look beautiful based on these Eurocentric beauty norms, which I hadn't even considered as a settler filmmaker, a filmmaker from settler culture. So then all of a sudden I'm learning. So the reason why I'm telling you this is because the most important elements to creating a real film about real people is starting with trust and moving to truth and following that truth wherever it takes you. Now, I've also followed stories that don't make it into the film. I've followed stories for weeks that don't make it into the film. And that's the other sort of one of the limitations about documentary filmmaking is I've made doc films in 12 days. I've made a doc film in 30 days. I've edited a film in 9 weeks, and I've edited a film in 28 weeks. And it all depends on budget and time, and also your delivery date and what day the network is expecting you to deliver the film. One of the other things I've learned over time is point of view. Now we all, everybody's seen Michael Moore's films, and Michael Moore inserts himself in the film, and that's one way of doing it, absolutely. But as I become more experienced, and the more really fascinating people I meet, and the opportunities that we have to tell these stories, one of the things I try to do right at the very beginning is step out of the way of the narrative. Now, I have a point of view. So I decide at the beginning of the film that I believe that baby powder causes ovarian cancer, even though there's all kinds of people that said that it didn't. This was 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago. People said I was going to get sued by Johnson and Johnson. People said I was going to get in trouble. You're going to go to jail. They're going to shut the film down. You're going to get blah, blah. But I decided, no matter what, I was going to believe the science, and I was going to believe the women. I decided that was it. No holds bars. That was the point of view that I was going to take. But I was going to remove my personal narrative out of it completely. And I was going to step away and provide the women in the film the space to tell their own stories. And that's really hard to do because sometimes you want to manipulate it, or sometimes it sounds better if you just use it this way, or you try to make somebody say something because you need them to say it in this way because it'll be way more dramatic for the film. I promise the most poignant, the most sensitive, the most impactful moments of a doc is when we have the courage to step out of the way and allow the sentence to continue, and not worry about a jump cut, and not worry about that it doesn't look as perfect as we want it to look, even though we want it to be as beautiful as possible. So what I learned many years ago, and I didn't go to film school. I was a theater major. And I had this, and as I said, I was an athlete. And I ended up in this situation where I was working at CBC Sports, and this was a long time ago. So I'm going to say around 2000. And maybe a little bit later than that. And I ended up meeting this really incredible man named Paul Harrington. And he worked in the doc unit. And I had an opportunity to cut a couple of the Olympic profiles. I don't know if you've seen them, but they're 2 or 3 minutes before, Jane Brown is going to, do luge, and you see this little sort of profile of her before she actually does her competition. So I had this opportunity to cut one of these, and so when she was a bobsledder, I think, and so she was smashing down the mountain, and I put this really heavy metal music as she was smashing down the mountain. And Paul said, "Oh, it looks really great. The interview was okay. You talked a lot. And why don't you, instead of heavy metal music, which made complete sense, wide world of sport kind of thing going on?" He said, "Why don't you try something softer, like something classical or something, with a little bit more emotion?" I thought he was an idiot, and I quietly went away. And anyway, I tried it, and it was beautiful. But what he said was, "I'm going to send you to a course, and it's a course about how to ask questions." And I thought, okay. And it was somebody that had trained Johnny Carson. And I guess Johnny Carson, they said he was the best question answer, the best person that asked questions. And the reason why he was the best person to ask questions was because he got out of the way of the question. So here's by way of example. So I say, "So it's really nice to meet you. And I understand you're from Killaloe, Ontario, and you're 36 years old, and you have 4 children, and you have brown hair and blue eyes, and you're a teacher." And the person says, "Yes." And so what you have is a yes. But if you say, "Where were you born? What was it like growing up in Kapuskasing? How are you?" So the question always is very short. And what you'll find, if you ask someone, "How are you?" If you just start, you're sitting down, and here's a trick. So what we never do is we never say rolling or action. Ira Singh, who I work with a lot, she's a really brilliant cinematographer, and the sound people that I work with are we decide ahead of time that we're just going to roll. So even if the person is just entering the room, or they're in the kitchen, or I'm sitting them down, we're rolling. And we're rolling not to surprise them. We're rolling because I never want a hard in. So, Mary, how are you? I always just start talking. "Oh God, it's hot outside. How are you? Whatever. It's really nice to meet you." We talk, we talk, we talk. And then as we're sort of, getting to know each other, I say, "Well, just to let you know, the camera's on, and we're just going to start, just really whatever." And sometimes I don't say anything. And then I'll ask a couple questions, and then they'll say, "Is the camera rolling?" And I'll say, "Yeah." And I'm not trying to trick them, but it becomes less formal. People get, especially if they've never been on camera before, people can get extremely tense when you sit down. But most important, simple questions. And prepare them in advance, and you will feel every single time you ask a simple question, how, what, where, why, who was your first who was your first mentor? When did Johnson and Johnson? And a great way to after someone answers a question is you ask them, "How do you feel about that?" Because when you ask somebody how they feel, it gives them agency. As if you tell them how they feel, it shuts them down. How did that make you feel? What makes you happy about? What makes you sad about? And those two questions, I imagine if you spoke to people that work with me all the time, they are actually waiting for that moment when I say, "What made you happy about that?" And I always ask, "What made you happy?" And then, no, I always ask, "What made you sad?" first, and then, "What made you happy?" Because it's really hard to recover if you ask somebody, um, if you ask someone what made them sad, they go to this place and they go further, and you can actually spend a lot more time in that space. And you give them a moment, and if you turn it and say, what made you happy, or what makes you happy about the situation, or how do you see this situation changing? um, on camera, you'll see the change. On camera, you'll see them pull out of that moment. And that sometimes those transitional moments with no sound and no dialogue are some of the most magical moments that you can have in a film. So, cinematography. One of the greatest gifts is working with an amazing cinematographers and directors of photography. And the very first time I met Iris Singh, I was going to be making a film, and she said to me, what do you think? What's the visual language of the film? And I said, I don't know. And one of my very favorite places and one of my very favorite moments in filmmaking is when I don't know. Like, I really don't know. I don't know what the film looks like. I don't know what the film sounds like, because the film's not talking back to me. And one of the most important relationships in a documentary is the relationship between the cinematographer and the filmmaker, who are both filmmakers, because it is a collaboration. It is an utter partnership, because you're not sitting on set at a video village looking at your multiple cameras, where the DP is behind their video village with the other, and the DP is calling the film or the TV series from a video village, and the director is on a monitor. Often, I often will set up a monitor, but I'm actually in the moment, and I'm not directing the action because it's really happening. So, but when we're in a controlled environment, we decide, like, we're working on a film right now, and I can't say too much about it except for it's about human rights and Olympic sport. And we decided that we wanted the gaze to be completely without objectifying these athletes, but it was about the whole person, the whole body. And so we created this language, but whenever we were speaking to someone in situ, or whether we were in an interview, we decided to frame really wide, instead of doing the sort of the medium talking head sort of square like I'm in on this screen right now. And it's really great because we shot all over the world, and we had an opportunity to really create this language together. And so my relationship with Iris evolves, like the language evolves as you're shooting. But if you establish it at the beginning, like we play with things, and we decided, like with Toxic Beauty, it was all about angles. So all the interviews had these sharp angles. And so the scientists and the experts were very very sort of sharp and very important. And our interviews with the women that were dying, and the subject in the film were softer, and visually softer and gentler, because the subject matter was more gentle. And so when you have that relationship and you're trying to establish a visual language, it's really important. Like, for example, with Sam Vino's film that we just saw, he's in the bayou. And so the bayou actually becomes a character in the film, and the sound design and the score. And so even without any of these fabulous characters in his film, he's creating a visual language that has texture to it. The other, vital, critical relationship is, of course, with your editor. And in my experience, it's really wonderful if you can establish an editor right at the beginning of your process. So I would say in development, you want to engage an editor in the process of your film, so that editor is part of. I don't do shot lists really, but part of the creative development of the film, because they become such an important part of the post production process. I think I'm getting somebody's asking me something, so I'm just going to look and see. Okay, so one second. Tanya, hi. This is fascinating, Phyllis. Oh, well, I'm glad. Um, Johnny, what drives you to make documentary films? Um, that's a great question. I think for me, I love the interaction with real people in real time. And I also think that we have a great opportunity as human beings to contribute to affecting change. And I always think movie to movement. What can happen outside of a film that can actually affect change. So I'm really drawn to impact films and films that can make affect change in a small way to an individual, but maybe can be start a movement. So to your end, I feel like am I in the sun or am I good? Am I too sunny? I don't know. I'm being told I'm good. Okay. Anyway, so like for Toxic Beauty. So Toxic Beauty got finished, blah blah blah, and you never know how a film is going to do. But in a year since it first screened at Hot Docs as one of the five big idea films, we've had 60 million impressions. Johnson and Johnson has taken talc off the shelves in North America and baby powder, and there's now a big push to have it removed in the rest of the world. So is that because of the film? Well, the film is what the film did was put everybody who is important, not everybody, but most of the key players in one place at one time, and we were part of the conversation. And sometimes film can do that because film can hit many people, all at once. And I also like it because it's a small unit. I really love, traveling with, the cinematographer um, and sound person, and landing in Nairobi and being driven to a tribal village in Gong, or landing in Joburg and driving to a tribal village in Limpopo, and and being invited into these worlds that I never would have an opportunity to participate in. And I think also we're all sort of resolving our own stuff, whatever our sort of lived experiences are somehow, this Olympic film, it has to do with women's rights and human rights. I had, human rights issues when I was a kid, and, sort of resolving our own sort of personal issues. I think someone else has something that they asked me. Sophie, and Edwards, do some docs explore relationships between the filmmaker and the so-called subject? Yeah. Oh, yeah, A Better Man. My friend Iris, who's cinematographer, did the film A Better Man, and I believe the filmmaker, she was in an abusive relationship, and she actually confronts her abuser in the film. So she's the filmmaker. She's also the subject of the film, and she's confronting her. I don't know if it was her husband or her partner, but throughout the film she confronts him. And I think yes, I think that I think that's important. I actually thought about doing that on this next film that I'm making, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure I want to insert myself or how I feel into the film. But I'd be very interested in finding um, a subject that I feel safe enough, to explore that as a filmmaker. But I really admire filmmakers that put themselves right into a subject, and it's not easy to do, because it makes you extremely vulnerable. What is a DP? Director of photography. Yes, that was from Veronica. Yeah, so the director of photography. Usually called cinematographer in doc films. But and I think I have a little bit of time left, but this is a really interesting time in our lives. And I really, love what Marie Clements said last night when I was doing the Q&A with her. I said, your film deals with subject matter and racism and conflict and love, and she's really amazing themes in her film. And what's happening today, it's relevant. And she said, well, this has been happening for a really long time. And I think that what I've learned, you know, as a settler from the settler culture, is that it's really important for each individual filmmakers from each individual cultures and from their own given circumstance and lived experience to tell their own stories. And I think that sometimes sometimes it takes a while to find your voice, but once you do, hold on to it and don't let anyone take it away from you. And it's a difficult time in filmmaking because I'm dying of sweat here because I'm sitting in the sun. Um, a lot of established uh, film companies, executive producing companies, get a lot of the money and support from the broadcasters. And in their defense, they say, well, those companies will deliver on time and on budget. And I think more and more now, networks are and being forced to acknowledging the importance of diverse and indigenous voices and indigenous stories being told from the point of view of indigenous filmmakers. Black stories being told by Black filmmakers, Black storytellers, and I do believe Dr. Shirley Chichu has, we've known each other for 20 years, and she spent very patiently a lot of time with me working in truth and reconciliation. And I know that importantly now, it's for all of us and the settler culture really to get out of the way and to provide, whatever knowledge we can provide, but to support and to acknowledge the very strong voices that are from other cultures, and really to step out of the way, because if we continue to get funded, we're taking money away from other stories that need to be told. So I think it's a really interesting time for us as filmmakers to sort of to get out of the way and tell our own stories. I was laughing this morning. I was saying, I had 6 days left on this film that I was shooting in Africa and India, and then COVID hit. So I have 6 days left. And then I thought, why the hell am I shooting a film in Africa and India? And why am I telling these stories? And how can I rationalize, telling stories of cultures that are not my own? And I really had to take a step back and look at that. But I think the most important thing is documentary filmmaking is not drawing a straight line, and it it there are many ways to tell a story, and there's always a beginning, a middle, and an end to everything, but it doesn't have to necessarily go in that order. I'm going to check and see if I have any other questions. Oh, okay. What impact do you think COVID will have on the film industry? Oh my goodness. Well, I think it's already had a huge impact. I was laughing at the very beginning. I said on Friday I had a year's worth of work, and on Monday I was out of a job. I think, well, certainly travel has affected. Maybe the kinds of stories that we tell. I don't remember who I was saying it to today, but I was thinking maybe I'll just do zero footprint filmmaking and I'll tell a story about my neighbor or my dog, or, maybe my father who's, living with dementia, who I never got along with. And maybe I'll call it Conversations with My Father. Maybe things are going to get a little bit closer for a while. I know that scripted narrative series are getting back. They have all these, guidelines, but maybe this sort of world travel situation and maybe telling our own stories our own way. Maybe everything doesn't have to be so big. Maybe people in other countries need to tell their own stories, and maybe we need to tell our own. And maybe that where we live is finding stories that are important. And for networks and for executive producers to hear our stories and to value them as important. And so it doesn't have to be this big international, sales opportunity or this massive um, film. Toxic Beauty didn't start off as a massive film. Toxic Beauty was a struggling story, and I was actually quite nervous that I wasn't going to find a narrative. And the narrative found me. And it sounds really cliche, but it's really true. And if you listen loud, listen hard enough, sometimes these films sort of find the way. Creative license is having a structure. And it doesn't have to be a hard structure, but you need a plan. So when you're thinking about, even if you're going to make a film about, your mother in the backyard, you have to make a plan and follow the plan. And when the plan changes, it's okay, because when you have a plan, you can actually shift within that plan. But creative mess is saying, I'm going to make a movie. Now, if you have all the time in the world and all the money in the world, and you can shoot anything you want, just petting my dog. If you have all that, then you can shoot for 2 years or 5 years, like Waking Life or some of the other films that Linklater's made, and you've got all the time. You can shoot endless amounts of footage, but often we don't have that. We don't have the time or the money or the budget. But keep your voice, and the word fight is sort of a also controversial word right now, but I think that we have to stay strong and powerful in our own voices, or all films start to look the same. And I think that that's one really important message that I can give you. I was saying earlier to Adam and Lindsay, I maybe should have had some visual aids, like showing you some trailers or something. Another thing that I've really enjoyed is working with archivists and visual researchers, and looking for as I said, a lot of stories happened a long time ago. This particular Olympic film that I'm working on, this story actually started in 1928. It started before that, but the first sort of documented human rights violation was in 1928. So, how do you find the archival footage, and working with an archivist? So that's also when you're making documentary films, they can become a huge partner and almost like a narrative story editor for you when you're working with archivists. So keep your questions simple: who, what, where, why, how. Don't make a long sentence. One sentence, and listen. Listening is more important than talking, as we all know. But when you're asking questions and someone is giving you an answer, really listen hard, because one or two things that they say in that interview can send you in a whole other trajectory as far as your narrative is concerned with your film. I'm going to check and see if anybody else is asking anything. Oh, look, I have a couple. Kelly Manchester. Oh, wow. That's not, this is great. Thanks, Tanya. This is so good, Phyllis. Thank you. Also, how amazing is the view behind you? It is pretty special. I'll show everybody. It's pretty nice. What am I working on next? Well, I have this Olympic film that I'm finishing, and then I'm not sure. I've just sort of come to a place where I am reevaluating what I want to bring into my life, and the kind of stories that I want to tell. Working on a feature film with Shirley Chichu. Maybe something with my father. I'm not sure. but nothing epic. Um, Unfortunately, the network didn't put my the follow-up film Toxic Beauty into development, so I actually maybe selling pencils at the corner of Queen and Jarvis when I get back to Toronto. So if anybody wants to stop by, I'll do a little dance or something. Um, but I think that it's also there's this really amazing opportunity to also combine. We used to call them recreations. I'm sure they're still called recreations, but I think one of the most exciting things is to sort of blend documentary filmmaking and narrative filmmaking. So, how do you tell, a real story in real time, but also gesture back in time and actually take us in with sort of a narrative structure that isn't just a recreation, but a beautifully shot narrative scenes. And I'm thinking that might be something that I would be interested in exploring, or maybe I'll just go and do corporate videos. I'm not sure, but I think that you can't be afraid as a documentary filmmaker of intimacy, and intimacy means also that you are vulnerable. So when you're working with characters or real human beings that have a point of view, that sometimes have an emotional story to tell, or you're following them in something that is difficult, um, for you to be as vulnerable to them as they are to you. And that doesn't mean necessarily telling them a story about yourself. It's being there and present and being a witness and being a true witness and an intimate witness to the stories that they're telling you. And the last thing I'm going to tell you, or that I'm going to share, is that this is one thing I had to learn, and it's not the hard way, but I did have to learn this, and I'm getting better at it, but I'm not perfect, obviously. Um, it's boundaries. So how does one, as a filmmaker, be intimate, stay in your truth, um, be in a trusting relationship with the person or people that you're working with on a film, or that you're doing a film with, and then the film is locked, which just means you're finished it, and it's at a film festival, and it's over, and you're moving on to another project. But you have this relationship that you've developed with these women or with these characters that you've been speaking to them, let's say every day for 6 months, or when they're sad, or when something happens, or if they're in trouble, or if they need some support, you're there for them. And then all of a sudden, when the film wraps out and you've delivered, and you're now dealing with a whole new set of characters and people that also have extraordinary stories, and that you're giving your entire heart and soul to. How do you manage that and sort of maintain your own mental health, and without also creating a space for your characters or the people in your film to feel abandoned? So I was very, very bad at it on one particular film that I did. And it got to be that I just didn't even know how to tell. It was a year later and I was still connected to the people in the film. So what I did was sort of get out of the way and allow Iris and sound people to also establish their intimate relationship. And it kind of spread it out, and it spread out, created a more intimate environment for everyone. And it spread it out off me and to us all as a unit. Like one of the women from Africa only asks about Irish. She never asks about me when I'm talking to her on WhatsApp. there's some fabulous films in the festival this year. And documentary film is a fabulous place to create and to be. I want to thank you for spending time with me today. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to, for the festival, to give you my email. Happy to read a treatment, happy to support and help in any way that I can. And maybe I'm just going to be an old Dolly mentor, and I'm not going to make Johnny, and I'm not going to make any more films. Anyway, thank you so much, and have a wonderful festival.
Remember that path behind our old house that took us further than any car could?